personally belong to a family who migrated as a refugee from Pakistani Punjab.
So the diaspora does not give funds alone, but it also provides ideas, skills, and knowledge for developmental activities.
The internal migrant labor force in Europe that actually facilitated an industrial revolution.
The Sri Lankan Tamil diaspora has an identity of being a Tamil and being a Sri Lankan.
The links between education and mobility in the context of a very strong culture of migration.
UAE is the largest destination of Indian diaspora, followed by the United States of America.
Gulf outside Kerala has created a Gulf within Kerala itself.
Work from home is not for the migrant workers. They have to go outside and they have to work.
We should discuss in this national seminar about Tamil diaspora and their engagement with cultural and environmental issues in Homeland. So, when we talk about cultural and environmental issues of Tamil diaspora, automatically one can understand that it has something to do with identity formation. Identities are very, very important for a diaspora. Whether you are from Tamil Nadu or from Andhra or from Kerala or from Punjab or Bihar, UP, it has become an important issue within the Indian diaspora throughout the world. And when you look at the Indian diaspora, it has today become one of the largest diasporas in many advanced developed countries, particularly in the US, Canada, Britain, Australia, Germany, and many other countries. So when you look at the Indian diaspora as a whole, when they've started to play very important roles both in the political and in the economic fields of other countries, and when the second and the third generation have come in, today there is an issue of identity for the first generation. The first generation continues to identify itself with the country of origin, that is India, and in particular with the state of origin. So when you look at diaspora in particular in that sense, you will understand why I have chosen to concentrate on the idea of Tamil diaspora. Yesterday, the speakers spoke mostly in terms of diaspora, Indian diaspora in the inaugural address. But in the keynote address, you found that it was more with regard to the Manipuri diaspora. So in that sense, India has diasporas of varied nature. So it has become very important to talk about particular diasporas in India. So, and because this also includes identity formation in various parts of the world, particularly when you talk about the Malayali diaspora. In Middle East, when you talk about Indian diaspora, we are talking mainly about the Malayali diaspora because they form the majority in Middle East. So in that respect, I would like to talk about the Tamil diaspora today. So coming to the topic of Tamil diaspora's engagement with cultural and environmental issues in Homeland. Normally, when you talk about a diaspora is more concerned with the issues of identity in the place where it has adopted, the country where it has, which it has adopted. Very rarely it engages itself with environmental issues or cultural issues directly in its homeland. So when I talk about homeland, I'm talking about India, the place from where the Tamil diaspora originated. So when I talk about India, I'm talking in particular about Tamil Nadu. So why is it that one should talk about the identity issue of a diaspora in its homeland? That is a question that we need to look at and address. Before I launch into my theoretical premises, I would like to go on into some of the reportings that has come in the newspapers over a period of time to highlight about the diaspora's engagement with cultural and environmental issues. In 2017, January, Tamil Nadu experienced a huge protest. All over Tamil Nadu, the students, housewives, and people from various walks of life participated in protest throughout Tamil Nadu in the January of 2017. In the January, the Tamil people celebrate the harvest festival called Pongal. And during Pongal, we have a kind of a bull fight, which is called Jallikattu. Jallikattu is a cultural form of showing one's bravery. And so for that, a bull is set free, and young people, youth, they combat with the bull and they try to catch the bull by its horns. There is no effort to do any damage to the bull. They only attempt to catch the bull by its horns. And if they can hold on to the bull by either its horns or the hump for about 2 minutes, they become a winner. But a presentation was made in the Supreme Court of India. A petition was filed in the Supreme Court of India that these bulls are being injured during this kind of a bullfight. Normally, in this kind of a bullfight, we find that it is the young people who are injured more because they get trampled by the bull or they get thrown by the bull. Otherwise, the animal as such does not usually get injured. It is in a very rare case that the animal gets injured. And in the petition, there was also a question about public safety during the sport. It was stated that quite often the bulls run into the public and injure the public. So it should be banned. And the Supreme Court also allowed the ban initially, allowed the sport to be banned. Immediately after the Supreme Court judgment, we found that there were global protests to call off the ban and continue the sports. The demonstrations took place both in Tamil Nadu and in various countries. And the Tamil diaspora's role was one of the key aspects to which the Supreme Court took into account to lift the ban. So the protest took place between the time period of 8th January 2017 to 23rd January 2017. And by 23rd January, the Supreme Court lifted the ban and the sport was allowed to continue. See, the protests were organic in Tamil Nadu. There were no leaders. The protest was spontaneous and it started first in Madurai, then it went on to Chennai, and quickly it spread to all other parts of Tamil Nadu and all other parts of the country also where Tamils were residing. So in entire India, you find Tamils protesting against the ban of Jallikattu sport in India. Very soon we found that these protests found an echo in other countries also. And in many other countries also, the demands were very peaceful. The protests were found in Sri Lanka. Sri Lanka has a very large Tamil community. Of course, Sri Lankan Tamils are different from the Indian Tamils, but yet there was a protest in Sri Lanka by Sri Lankan Tamils. There was protest in Britain, Australia, USA, Germany, Belgium, and in many other parts of Western countries. Many of these places, that protest was organized by the Tamil Sangams or associations. The Tamil Sangams are existing in different parts of the world. Tamil Sangams or associations are places where Tamils congregate to maintain their cultural identity in that particular country which they have adopted. And the World Tamil Organization also organized protests again outside the British High Commission, outside the Indian High Commission in London. And we found that many of these protests were in particular organized by people coming from Madurai, but being part of the Tamil diaspora. Because Jallikattu is a sport which was played for more than 2000 years in Madurai region mainly. So we found that the Madurai people were organizing this protest and leading this protest in UK, Germany, and in US. In Sri Lanka, the protest was held in Jaffna, where the Tamil community resides in large numbers. In Sydney and in Melbourne, we found the protest being led by the Tamil community in Australia. Again, we found that the way that the diaspora articulated about the protest was that this is a sport which has been in existence right from the period of Indus Valley civilization. Because Indus Valley civilization, you have a seal which shows that, which has a humped bull. In North India, we don't have bulls with humps. But in Indus Valley civilization, there is a seal which shows a humped bull. And in Jallikattu, only humped bulls are used for the sport. So protesters claimed that this was a sport which was being practiced right from Indus Valley civilization period on for 4,000, 5,000 years. So they were questioning the ban based on that. See, there may not be much historical accuracy with regard to this, but the fact that the bull was humped in Indus Valley showed that this practice of taming the bull by holding on to its hump was in existence even before. So culturally, when you see, it shows the fine divide. The argument has got a divisiveness in terms of showing that there are two different racial communities in India. One is the Aryan, the other is the Dravidian. So the diaspora insisted that this is a Dravidian sport. The very fact that there is a humped bull in Indus Valley shows that it was a Dravidian civilization. So that is the kind of arguments that has been put forth today by Tamil nationalists. So these people took up this kind of a nationalist debate and used that in their protest in various capitals in the world. So when you look at these, the articulation, we'll go into that a little later, but it is very important to understand that when a diaspora articulates, it is trying to show that it has a particular identity. Now, so this Jallikattu was in particular about the cultural identity of the Tamils. The second protest that took place was in 2018. It was against the sterlite industry, which is there in Thoothukudi. Thoothukudi is a port town in Tamil Nadu, in southern part of Tamil Nadu. And one of the biggest industries in the world for manufacturing copper is the sterlite industry. And sterlite has had a very big history in the sense that sterlite, when it attempted to put up its in the unit in Goa, the people of Goa protested and they kicked it out. They refused to accept sterlite copper smelter plant to be placed in Goa. A copper smelter unit is considered to be very polluting. A copper smelter unit is considered to be highly polluting. So the people of Goa refused to have sterlite there. Then sterlite shifted in 1992 to Maharashtra. it was allocated 500 acres of land in Ratnagiri in Maharashtra to set up a 60,000 ton copper smelter plant. But the people of Ratnagiri district ordered the company not to place its plant in Maharashtra. Then Sterlite attempted to get into Kerala. The Kerala government also refused to give permission to Sterlite to set up the unit there. But in Tamil Nadu in 1994, Sterlite was welcomed by the Tamil Nadu government, and the Tamil Nadu Pollution Control Board issued a no objection certificate and allowed the Sterlite plant to be placed in Tuticorin in Tamil Nadu. Once Sterlite set up plant from 1995, there has been a lot of protests going on against the plant and many cases being filed against the Sterlite plant. And many a time there has been gas leak within the plant, and that has led to protests, court orders, temporary closures, and various kinds of problems coming up. But in April 2018, the protest became very large. Almost the entire city of people in the entire city of Tuticorin participated in this struggle against Sterlite. Ultimately, in May, the police resorted to firing against the protesters and killed 13 protesters. This led to a global protest against Sterlite. Already, Sterlite did not have a very good track record globally also in its other units in Australia, in South Africa, and many other parts of the world. Now, Sterlite is a industrial plant which is owned by the Vedanta Group. And Vedanta Group is, the owner of Vedanta Group is one Mr. Agarwal from Bihar, who himself is a diasporic Indian. So, this protest made it all the more important to understand because the owner of the Sterlite unit is a diasporic Indian, and the people protesting against Sterlite were diasporic Indians. So that becomes a very important aspect of this protest that we have to try to understand. And anti-Sterlite protest started in a huge way in America in April 2018. People from Thoothukudi in different parts of America organized the struggle against Sterlite. By using social media tools, the young people called on the Tamil diaspora in different parts of America to organize the protest. So there was huge protest. Lots of people turned up. More than 1,000 people turned out in Chicago, in Dallas, Texas, in Morrisville, North Carolina, in Houston, in Atlanta, New York, Washington, D.C., and in many other cities where Tamils were living in large numbers. And one of the main things when you look at the protest, the video of the protest, is that many of these protesters were raising slogans in Tamil and not in English, though they were living abroad. So this again goes on to show the identity issues which both the diaspora faces in India as well as abroad. We'll come to that later. So when the protest came up in a huge way in US, the protest also overflowed into Europe. Both in Germany and in London, you found Tamil diaspora organizing protest against the Sterlite plant. And in London in particular, the Tamil diaspora held its protest in front of Anil Agarwal's home. Anil Agarwal, who was the owner of Vedanta, the holding company of Sterlite. In front of his home, they held the protest. They were holding banners that read, "Sterlite kills, stay out of Tamil Nadu. Ban Sterlite from Thoothukudi." So using these kind of banners, they held protest in front of Anil Agarwal's house. And the police had to come and regulate the protest because they did not want the protest to become in any way unruly. And in Australia, you found the protests going on in a big way where doctors organize these protests. Professionally, when you see, doctors rarely come out to organize, but many doctors took part in the protest against Sterlite. So these are all certain highlights that we have to notice when we talk about diaspora. The third issue that I want to talk about is the NEET exam, the National Eligibility Entrance Test for medical admission, medical studies admission. After Sterlite protest, we found in 2018 that the Tamil diaspora was also demanding the government of India to put an end to the NEET examination. See, NEET examination is something that is related only to India and within India. The diaspora has no role to play in NEET examination. If they want to get admission in medical schools in India, they apply under the NRI quota and they get admissions based on NRI quota. They have to pay fees in dollars. So it becomes a question as to why the Tamil diaspora, and particularly the American Tamil diaspora, was protesting against NEET. You found that when the NEET examination was introduced, there was huge protest in Tamil Nadu. And when the protests were ongoing itself, one girl called Anita hanged herself. Anita comes from a laboring class family, and she could not go for NEET coaching classes as she had no money, but she had obtained very good marks in a +2. So she had dreams of becoming a doctor, doing a medical education. When she could not get admission, when she could not clear NEET, when she could not get the cutoff for NEET, she committed suicide. And this raised a hue and cry in Tamil Nadu. And there was a huge protest in Tamil Nadu against NEET. These protests in Tamil Nadu spilled over into America. See, there comes a question why the American Indians or American Tamils want to have a say with regard to NEET. Americans have their own way of getting educated in America. They can do their medical studies in America. Many Indians go abroad to do their medical studies, and so same way American can get easily medical admission in America. But Americans were interested in the NEET exams here. They found that the NEET exams were discriminatory. They echoed the same argument as the Tamils were making, that it is discriminatory against poorer sections of the society, and in particular against the Tamil society, because we had our own examinations and we had our own way of admissions, getting admissions into the medical system, medical education. So, but many in America had relations here, very close familial ties, where they were supporting education of families in India. So the Americans found an echo, where the NEET protest found an echo in America when Americans were forced that they cannot get admission in Tamil Nadu medical colleges. So in that sense, the NEET protest was very strong. And when the foreign minister, for external affairs minister, Sushma Swaraj, when she was attending the proceedings in UN General Assembly on September 23rd, there was a huge protest in front of the UN by Tamils from New York, New Jersey, Connecticut, Peninsula, Delaware, and Virginia. It was a huge protest, and the protesters wore masks depicting Anita and holding Indian and American flags. See, when they are holding both Indian and American flags, they are trying to show their identity both as Indians and as Americans. This is a kind of a duality which you find in most diasporas. So, when the External Affairs Minister Sushma Swaraj was going to give a speech in the UN, the protesters increased the volume of their protest. And more than 1,000 people participated in that protest. So you find that one of the arguments that the protesters gave at that time is that the imposition of NEET would remove the kind of social justice practiced in Tamil Nadu, both by the society and the community. Tamil Nadu is one state, the only state in India which has 69% reservation. And Tamil Nadu, because of this reservation policy, has been able to move forward in, Tamils have been able to contribute to the Indian economy in big ways. So, with the imposition of NEET examination, Tamils felt that their social justice was at stake. And that was one of the reasons why the diaspora was protesting. So these three protests, I've shown three kinds of protests. One is the Jallikattu protest with regard to Tamil identity and culture. Two, the protest against NEET examination imposed by the center on Tamil Nadu, which again people felt is against social justice. And the third protest with regard to environmental issue, where the sterilite industry, which was highly polluting and thrown out of Maharashtra, Goa, and Kerala, found a place in Tamil Nadu from 93 onwards. So these three protests highlight the role of diaspora in India, the Tamil diaspora in various parts of the world with regard to identity formation. So now looking at these issues, what I'm trying to develop here is the idea that how migrant communities try to express certain social injustice which they experience, not just the community in India, but also the migrant community in abroad. Okay, the diasporic community also experiences certain social injustice in locally, nationally, and in transnational scales. See, when a person migrates from one part of India, it is not that he forgets his whole being from that part of India. The language and certain other factors go into formation of his identity. Now, a South Indian is very different from North Indian. So a Tamil is very different from a Malayali. A Punjabi is very different from a Bengali. So we all have our identities in India. We have various kinds of identities, but we try to come across as Indians when we walk into the national sphere. But when our lived experience in our own state reinforce the identity through language, culture, and various other practices and customs. So when a person migrates, he carries along with him the baggage of this culture. He carries along with him the baggage of language and identity. So when we talk about diasporas, we can talk about diasporas in a homogenized fashion as Indian diaspora. But one problem is the homogeneity does not always exist among the Indian diaspora. Just the way that we express our heterogeneity in India, the diaspora also expresses its heterogeneity in the country which they have adopted. So when you look at why, into the question of why they express the heterogeneity, you find that along with the various baggages, they also experience, they also have taken across seas the baggage of social injustice which they experienced in India. So when you talk about the idea of social injustice, now, for example, with regard to NEET exam or with regard to Jallikattu protest, bull taming protest, you find that both these not only talk about the Tamil identity on one hand, but they also show that, particularly the NEET examination shows that certain certain development which has taken place historically in Tamil Nadu is through the idea of reservation and through the idea of implementation of social justice. This idea of social justice is enshrined in the Indian Constitution. Right to equality. So in this right to equality, the NEET examination is something that affords opportunity for many lower middle class and middle class people to rise up in the social status. In that respect, a person who has become qualified as a doctor or an engineer gets better opportunity to migrate, because many countries follow the point system. So they get many better opportunity to migrate. So you find that in India, those who have studied in IITs and those who have done their medical education migrating in large numbers earlier. Now you find that IT trained people, they are migrating in large numbers. So in that respect, when you see, education has afforded opportunities for a better quality of life and better standards of life for them abroad than in India. But yet, the umbilical cord with India is still very much intact, because the person who has migrated has left behind his family. And he has also taken along with him the cultural baggage of identity based on either caste, religion, or race. So when you talk about a South Indian, you're very clear that you're talking about a Dravidian population. When you today, this has become highly articulated in Tamil Nadu. This kind of language and this kind of ideas are being highly articulated in Tamil Nadu, particularly after the Modi government has come. That there is a divide. There's a between North India and South India in terms of Aryans and Dravidians. So this is also being reflected among the diaspora. And when we look at the way the diaspora activism is constructed, you find that they echo the same thought and words which are being spoken in Tamil Nadu. This echo is finding these words are finding an echo in London, in Sydney, in Washington. And this transnational activism also reinforces both their citizenship abroad in their adopted countries and lays claim to citizenship in India. Now, this is one of the reasons why the government of India came out with that IOC cards, Indian origin citizen cards. So when you look at this, I want to talk about a framework of citizenship and spatiality when we try to problematize the idea of Tamil diaspora. without talking about the idea of citizenship, because they have given up the citizenship in India when they moved abroad, many of these diasporic Indians. And when they have settled abroad, they still try to maintain their identity as a South Asian, either as an Asian or South Asian in many cases. And within the South Asian community, they try to retain their identity as Indian or as South Indian. So each of these issues are very important when you talk about maintenance of identity as Asian. Like America is a melting pot of various cultures. So in America, the Indian community still continues to have its own identity as a Asian community. And while interacting with the Asian community, they hold on to the identity as an Indian community or brown community. They are considered to be brown. And when it comes to interacting within the Indian community, the issue of North Indian and South Indian crops up even among the diasporic communities as it happens in India. So, in spite of having moved to a different culture and a different setting in the global sphere, we find diasporas attempting to maintain certain particularized identities. And in their struggles for citizenship, in particular, when you look at the Sri Lankan diaspora, I want to emphasize here, I'm talking about the Sri Lankan Tamil diaspora. They possess two identities. The Sri Lankan Tamil diaspora has an identity of being a Tamil and has an identity of being a Sri Lankan, just like the Indian Tamil diaspora. But the Sri Lankan Tamil diaspora was a diaspora which was, whereas the Indian Tamil diaspora voluntarily leaves their homeland and they have an opportunity to get back. But Sri Lankan Tamil diaspora was forced to leave because of the war in Sri Lanka, civil war in Sri Lanka, and the opportunities of coming back is very, very bleak. They are not welcome. So in that respect, there is a racialized experience for the Sri Lankan diaspora, and this has in certain respect transferred onto the Tamil diaspora, these racialized experiences. When you talk about the Aryan Dravidian divide in the diaspora, see, when you're in Europe, Europeans are basically, particularly in Germany, you're talking about Aryans. But the Tamil diaspora does not look at the Germans as an Aryan group. It looks rather at a Hindi-speaking Indian as an Aryan. So this is a complicated issue. And in that sense, the racialized experience becomes pronounced in their citizenship in another country also. And Tamils have their own culture, own language, own songs, and own practices, like Pongal, as I was telling you. The way it is celebrated, it projects the identity of the Tamil. So in that sense, when you see in a multicultural country like Canada, US, Australia, the practicing of one's cultural identity is very much welcomed and permitted. But yet, there is a dominant community in many of these countries which racializes the experiences for the subordinate communities. The Indian community experiences domination in racial terms, in terms of being Asian. and they being whites. But of course, in America, they do not have experiences to the extent of a black race. Being brown and being able to speak in English and holding certain kinds of jobs which are well paying, the Indian community has been able to get a lot of respect within the country which they have adopted, particularly in Canada, Australia, and USA. But when it comes with respect to formation of identity within the Indian community, within the Indian diaspora, the Tamil community through its Tamil Sangams or Tamil community associations has been able to project itself as a separate community. So in this respect, when you see, when you talk about Tamils as such, Tamils have for more than 5 centuries they have been a mobile community. They've been moving and they've settled in large numbers in Singapore, Malaysia, USA, in South Africa, in Trinidad and Tobago, and now in South American countries also. But as such, the Tamils have a strong presence in Malaysia, Singapore, and Sri Lanka. And Tamil is a national language in these 3 countries. But Tamil is not a national language in India. India does not have any national language. So there is no issue of within India for claiming that Tamil is a national language. But in Malaysia, Singapore, and Sri Lanka, Tamil is a national language. Until recently, Tamil was a national language in Sri Lanka. So today, all these Tamils, though being there, they have their own cultural differences. The Malaysian Tamil, the Sri Lankan Tamil, the Singapore Tamil, they have their differences. But the Indian Tamil has been able to form associations or sangams and claim a separate identity on their own. And as part of this identity, they have been able to associate themselves with issues in Tamil Nadu. And they've showed that there is a continuous linkage with the Tamil identity in India. There is also another issue that I should briefly touch upon. That is, during the floods in Chennai in 2015, the diaspora played a major role in providing philanthropy for rehabilitation of people who were affected by the floods. Many of the Tamil diaspora gave money and goods for people who lost their homes and goods in the floods. So you find that there is a continuous engagement of diaspora with the with the people of Tamil Nadu in Tamil Nadu. So this ethno-nationalism, which is being shown by the Tamil diaspora, can also be seen when the Tamil state, when they showed strong protest against Hindi, imposition of Hindi in 1960s. So in that sense, Tamil Nadu, the Tamil diaspora has always been trying to show it has never been allowing itself to be part of the homogeneity of Indian diaspora. I cannot say the same thing about the Telugu diaspora, but I can tell you that the Malayali diaspora has its own identity both in the US and in the Middle East. The Kerala diaspora, like the Tamil diaspora, maintains its own identity in Middle East and in US. So, and the Indian government also attempts to homogenize Indian diaspora through its official documents. Like when it talks about the NRIs, non-resident Indians, it gives it one single nomenclature that NRIs are Indians but non-resident people. And this is a classification which ignores that people have different citizenships and different privileges abroad also. In the sense that the Patel community of Gujarat, they control a lot of businesses in America, particularly the hospitality business. And they play a major role in development of tourism industry in the US. So when you, in a blanket way, say an NRI, as the government of India documents, the Patel community has a stronger voice within the diaspora, Indian diaspora, and is able to speak to the government of India. So in this respect, when you see the Tamil diaspora is yet to build up to an extent where it can also have a relationship with the Indian government on the same scale. So in that sense, homogenizing Indian diaspora has its own problems with regard to the various identities that Indians project abroad. You find that Bengali diaspora also projects its own image. So when you look at the Tamil diaspora, when you look at diaspora at large, in these kind of global issues, the diaspora, when it participates, there are also people who are participating locally in struggles there against these kind of globalization processes. Particularly when you talk in terms of global companies like Vedanta, where they are exploiting countries like India and countries in Africa hugely and causing pollution and damaging environmental health. The diaspora's participation in such struggles along with the local population gives a lot of force to address global environmental issues. So in that sense, these diasporas also bring in certain levels of universalization of issues. And at the same time, they are also participating in policy formation, both at the local level with regard to international companies or transnational corporations, and at the national level in the country of origin. So that in that sense, the diasporas have been working to address issues of poverty or political struggles, which is taking place in their homeland as well as in their country of origin. So when you look at the issues of poverty and struggles, Sterlite symbolizes that. The struggle with regard to NEET, the participation of the diaspora with regard to NEET examination embodies that. And very often, many of these diasporic protests are non-violent. And though they are non-violent, as Gandhi did in South Africa, they are a very serious, in a very serious way, these diasporic people are projecting their dissent in the country of adoption. Because in the country of adoption, very often they find themselves being a minority. They are not able to speak out with regard to struggles for political participation or accommodation or land. So when they participate highlighting issues in their homeland, these global diasporas are also talking about the problems they face in their country of adoption. In this respect, you find that the Tamil diaspora was trying to project the way they are being sociologically, if you speak, we call as other. The way they are othered, or they were talking about their outsider status in their country of adoption. Very often in the country of adoption, these diasporas have absolutely very little role to play politically, and they are mostly under the control of the companies in which they participate. So through this democratic tradition of non-violent protest, these diasporas have also been attempting to create a space for themselves in their country of adoption. At the same time, by showing their linkages with the homeland, they were trying to make a statement that they are of a particular identity and they are of a particular culture to the homeland countries in which they reside. I think I will end with this because I don't want to, there is still some more. We can discuss that if there is a question and answer session.